Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore hot topics and try to help you make sense of them from the inside. Today's insider is Chris Kelly, CEO of AssetHR, a human capital management and payroll firm. Chris and his team are counted on to decipher law changes that affect employers and employees around the United States. He's just the person to guide us through federal and state level changes happening in the United States for 2025 and beyond. Chris is here for the case file I call Benefits Boom or Bust. Chris, if you read the headlines, one day it's this, another day it's that, there's a deadline, then the deadline goes away. It gets to be really confusing with all of these changes.
Yeah, it's very scary for clients because they read laws that they think are going to happen tomorrow, and that's not really the case. It's going to possibly happen or it's in the house, but it hasn't become a law yet. So they hear it on the news, they start Googling, they get nervous. We put on a webinar and they realize that it's not going to happen for a year or two, and they take a deep breath. But yes, ever-changing. With the election, so many things have changed. Executive orders, it's caused a lot of chaos in the small business world.
Right, and rightly so. So businesses of all kinds, you're specifically dealing with what size companies, Chris?
So generally our sweet spot's 50 to about 1,500 employees. We do taxes and we service in just about every state. We're in 48 of the 50 states.
That is great. But these laws are affecting your clients. They're affecting smaller shops. They're affecting large corporations. And they cover various areas. So let's talk salary for a moment. So the salary transparency, what can you tell us about that whole field? And what should employers and employees know?
So this is a tricky one because Minnesota actually has a Minnesota paid transparency that took place starting this year, January 1st, 2025. But the Federal Transparency Act is only a proposed bill. So big difference. That was introduced into the House in March of 2023. Basically, what they're asking to do there is employers would need to provide the salary ranges for jobs in all their advertising. So they need to provide transparency of the rate of job, the benefits. In the past, when you're hiring somebody, you may not know what the salary of the person next to you is making.
And it's like a guessing game, right?
Yes.
In a way that does not empower employees, and maybe an employer might base their current salary that they would offer them off of what they're making currently and lowball them, possibly. Yeah. So these salary transparency acts are good no matter where in the country. Like you mentioned, Minnesota has one, some states have one. Now, what happens if you can kind of give us just the big picture on if this were to go through at the federal level, does that mean then every state needs to follow that?
What we've seen a lot of that's happened over the course of the last 90 days, some of these things then get lawsuits, so it goes into the courts. A federal judge will make a ruling and it may put things on hold and then it has to go up to the Supreme Court. So it's a very tough place for a small business owner to be because they're following Minnesota law, but now they're hearing there's possible changes that are going on.
In the case of Minnesota companies?
Yes.
Okay.
But that happens all over the place.
All over, regardless of the state. So it's really important, and you're operating in 48 states. First of all, if you're the size that Chris works with, call up AssetHR. But no matter who you are as a business owner, what should you be looking for? Do you ask your accountant? Do you ask your attorney? How do you make sure you're in compliance?
We have something we provide to our clients called the Compliance Center that gives them access to employment attorneys. So when we put a webinar on, we'll have clients that are ranging from 10 employees to a couple of thousand that are on the webinar. A lot of the things are not applicable to the smaller or to the larger, but to the masses, they may reach out and open up what we call a ticket and say, we'd like some more information. How is this going to affect us? And then they can actually get on the phone and get legal advice from one of our attorneys. That's a big deal. A lot of times, we'll get into some of the other gray areas, but like handbooks are a really big deal where people are Googling and they're in multiple states and they don't want to pay an employment attorney or true SPHR consultant to update their handbook. They'll cut and paste and they don't realize the liability that they're bringing onto themselves. Or they're in multiple states and they'll get the handbook just for the state that they're domiciled in, which is a big red flag as well.
Right. So no matter what, no matter where you live, make sure you're checking in with your attorney. And if you don't have an attorney, both on the employee and the employer side, to really make some sense of this, it's money well spent.
Yes.
You save yourself from possible lawsuits. On the employee side, you perhaps will gain in salary or benefits or things like that. All right. So speaking of employees, let's talk about PTO, personal time off. And there's the PTO Act that both employees and employers need to be thinking about.
So this, again, is a proposed bill.
At the federal level.
Yep. It's not into law yet, but if it was enacted, it would provide 10 days of paid time off for any reason to employees, and the PTO would be in addition to any sick time or family medical leave the employee is already entitled to. So once again, it's confusing. Is it going to be a federal law? Yet to be determined.
Okay, so that's one where are there some size businesses that would be negatively impacted if this were to become federal law?
Under the current version of the proposed bill, employees would accrue 1 hour of PTO for every 25 hours worked, up to a maximum of 80 hours or 10 days. Employees begin to accrue the PTO on the first day of employment, but a 60-day waiting period can be imposed. So that's like going back to the handbook where this law gets enacted. You have to really get your handbook updated because when you're onboarding an employee, that's one of the first things you're doing is going through your employee handbook with them.
And would this PTO Act, if it were to pass at the federal level, apply to only full-time employees or also part-time employees?
Yet to be determined.
Wow. So lots of questions.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I would call it a little fuzzy depending on what's happening here. What's your advice? I know that you give to your clients, but that you could give all of the Crisis Files listeners to just have some discernment and some patience as these things go through really state and federal legislatures.
So being a business owner is hard. Whether it's a mom and pop shop or a 1,000-person company, the state and federal laws are constantly changing. So you need a really good HR person, senior professional HR consultant, but you need labor attorneys as well. Also, you need to educate yourself. And what I mean by that, there are a lot of places, including ourselves, that will put on end-of-the-year changes federally that have happened in all 50 states. We'll do that at the end of November, early December. We'll put on a webinar will show every state from Alabama down to the last state of anything that has changed federally in that state. But from a state standpoint, you really have to understand when they're in session what's transpiring, what laws are being passed, and then educate yourself, whether it's through an employment attorney or an HR consultant, of how this is going to impact my business.
Now, many companies, depending on the size, have their own internal HR offices. I always say, the lawyer in me says, if it is an HR company or an inside HR professional, they are supposed to be thinking about the needs of both employees and employers. But remember, they are also employed by the company. So I'm not going to necessarily say this across the board, but there is a little bit of a corporate bias. If it's an employee in HR that's then turning around and giving advice to employees. So you have to make the decision if you are an employee and there is a corporate HR office, go because they have great resources, ask your questions, but understand, and this is just Roshini speaking here on the Crisis Files, I recommend that you also get your own legal advice. If you are an employee, if is a raise situation, a contract to review, don't just sign. They say to you, you have to sign this in 3 days. Say, nope, I need a week. I'm going to consult with my attorney. Or just say, I need a week and go consult with your attorney. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because, we're talking about employers, but employees have rights as well. And a lot of times they're giving their rights away if there's a layoff or downsizing, and they'll come and say, hey, Roshini, we have this buyout package for you, and we want you to sign it, but you have 24 hours. You're not giving the employee an ample amount of time to do that. A lot of the times the employee is afraid of compensation. How are we going to pay our bills?
And they might lose that comp.
Yes, they're going to lose their comp. Maybe they're not going to get paid out their bonuses. What's the insurance going to look like? Insurance on COBRA is extremely expensive. So they're in a panic situation, but they really, to your point, need to take a deep breath and get that separation agreement over to an attorney, because that could really give them some points that they weren't even thinking about. And maybe, I'm not saying the company's giving them a document that's one-sided, but it's definitely not going to be in the employee's favor.
It almost sounds like there could be something illegal if an employer says you have 24 hours to turn this around and sign it.
I just gave that as an example, but they use fear a lot of the times, because when you go home to your husband or your wife and say, I'm getting laid off after 20 years and, here's our buyout package. I remember my dad years ago, he was with a large publicly traded company, and 35 years, he came home on a Wednesday and his last day was Friday. His offer was retire or go to Flint, Michigan. And being from New York, he wasn't moving to Flint, Michigan.
Okay, so I would say, and this is my advice again, just speaking as Roshini, and my understanding and what I've lived through in law, in media, and crisis advice. Absolutely get an attorney in those kinds of situations, because if they were to say you're fired immediately, that probably is a lawsuit. Definitely take it home, read it on your drive home, call an attorney. And for any employee out there who's listening to this episode of the Crisis Files, I really want you to start proactively thinking about who's your phone a friend when it comes to a lawyer. Is it a family friend? Is it an actual lawyer? You also, I would say, don't imagine it's always going to be free advice. You might need to pay for that advice. But in the long run, paying several $100s or maybe $1,000 or $2,000 to get really good, adequate advice, and hopefully better than adequate, might save you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in what you are owed. So it's just case by case. And I will say there are wonderful HR offices out there, internal offices. There are people like Chris and AssetHR who are out there to help. So whether you're an employer or an employee, power up now before you're in a crisis situation. And that's part of the reason we wanted to do case file number 147, benefits boom or bust, because this stuff is happening. It's on the horizon. Chris, you and your team are tracking this far more closely than most of us. What are some of the common mistakes and pitfalls that people make both on the employer side and the employee side in these areas?
Through the years, I-9s are always a big deal. Documentation, exempt, non-exempt employees. Once again, I always try to err that everyone's trying to do things legally and do it the right way. But there have been business owners that don't want to pay an employee benefits and the taxes, so they'll say, hey, why don't you come on as a independent? But they don't meet the classifications. It's illegal to do it, but they try to get by with it. So employee handbook, OSHA, written programs, making sure that the workplace is a safe environment. Those are things that certificates of making sure employees that are driving forklifts gone through the certifications and are equipped and everything's up to date. So things a lot of times that clients are not thinking about because they're trying to run their business, but those are the foundational pieces that if there's, God forbid, a workplace injury and somebody's really hurt, OSHA is going to show up. They're going to do a full review. And if they find out that that employee driving the forklift wasn't trained properly, or isn't up to date, that is a major fine that's coming to the company.
I'm sure there will be a fine, but you might, in addition, they might stop you
100%.
From actually operating for a while, and in the worst case scenario, shut you down.
Yes.
All right, well, kind of asking for a friend. What if you're a business owner and you have mainly contract employees?
So there's it used to be 20-point test. I'm not sure of the number right now, and I apologize for that, Roshini, but there is definitely a clear lines of what is an employee and what is a contractor that you need to follow. And I would say if you don't meet the criteria, I say if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Usually it's going to be an employee. You're not going to be able to get away with independent contractor.
I have to share a personal story. And at first I was really a little nervous about it. But then when I just listened, and the person that was assigned to me was really thoughtful and a smart state worker. But I got an email, I want to say this is maybe last summer, so summer of 2024. And it said, you are going to be audited by the Unemployment Insurance Office. This is not part of this office or this office. You have to call this specific number. So I'm based in the state of Minnesota. My business is incorporated by the laws of the state of Minnesota. And I'm thinking, audit, you think of the IRS, worst case scenario. I got caught in touch with the contact who was assigned to me, and she said, she was very helpful, and she said, nope, you've done nothing wrong. This is kind of something that happens about every 10 years. Most businesses can expect a call from us. We paused during the COVID years. You've never been audited by the unemployment department. It's your first ever audit. And at that point, I was 18 years in business. So I took her at her word. But there is a lot of documentation you need to provide. And I, thank goodness, I have a lawyer, I have an accountant, I have a bookkeeper. My bookkeeper was my big assist. I basically had her do a lot of that costs money, but it was better than me not having all the right stuff. So my bookkeeper has been through this before with other clients. We got everything assembled. And the information that I was able to give for my small team of contract employees is I had to state how each was paid. Did they ever office with me? Did they set their own hours? Because if they set their own hours, that was much closer to them being absolutely a contract employee, not a W-2 employee. Anyway, it was a learning experience, Chris. I passed the audit very well, and the lawyer in me, I never want anyone accusing me of anything, so I'm very, very overindulgent on giving the paperwork. But that was an example. That's going to happen to many of our listeners out there, and it's nothing to be afraid of if you are following the law.
And if you have the right people alongside of you. So that's where a lot of times, a 100-person account doesn't know an employment attorney until it's too late. So to your point, having those resources, something that touched on me when you said that, though, that made me think, pitfalls. So applied for statuses, going into other states. So, hey, the business is growing. We want to go into Wisconsin. We want to go into Arkansas. We want to go into Oregon. We're doing business, but we haven't really filed all the paperwork or got applied for status. So we're not really paying state taxes that are, applicable for those states. So we kind of put the cart before the horse. Those are things, once again, you really need to have somebody to say, these are the steps you need to take in order to do business in those states. Another thing that you talked about that's a big deal right now with the letter that you got, there's a lot of fraud going on right now with identity theft and spoofing. That's when we talk about things to have a really good IT department. So things to think about, we have protocols in place on how do we answer a call and how do we process. But it's amazing how they've gotten so good. You'll get an email saying Roshini's requesting $20,000 to be sent to, and it looks like you. It's on your letterhead. It sounds, but it's really not you. But you get somebody that's multitasking, looking at your email, doing something else, and all of a sudden, they're processing something they shouldn't have. So it's having those type of protocols in place as well. Internally, and we encourage clients to try to put employees through testing. So when they're onboarding, what's their IT protocol, their internet protocol, and then there's spoof emails that you can hire a company to do to see if you get the employee to click on that, which, in the real world would cause a breach. But here it's going to alert them that you shouldn't have clicked on this. This is the reason why. And really educate them on things they should start looking for when they receive an email.
Good lesson learned in a safe space.
In a safe space, yes.
Well, Chris, thank you for helping us make sense of the large print, the fine print, and every other scary thing in between. This is certainly not the sexy stuff, but it is absolutely many areas here where employers and employees need to be smart. Connect directly with Chris and his team at AssetHR.com. Today's case file is powered by Northwing Digital. Northwing Digital is driven by a simple mission: help businesses succeed. Guided by core values, trust through transparency, and GSD, get stuff done. Northwing specializes in SEO and paid digital ads that deliver measurable results. From Google search to paid social, strategies that help your business stand out and grow. Make your marketing dollars work harder. Visit northwingdigital.com to get started. Northwing Digital, your partner in growth. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Go to thecrisisfiles.com to check out all 3 seasons of our library of case files. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.